Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our second webinar in the Content Strategy Fundamentals series. So for those of you who joined us for the first session, great to see you again. For those of you who are new, welcome, thank you. And don't worry that you didn't attend the first one because this webinar works in isolation and just builds on some of the concepts from the first webinar. So I'll make sure that it all kind of makes sense as a separate session as well. Today, we're going to dive into structure, governance, and scalability, three really big things in 1 hour. And they're the foundations really that make content strategy actually work in practice. So in the first webinar, we talked about what content strategy is and why you need it. And then today we're getting into the kind of the nuts and bolts of how to build systems that can grow with your organization. And then the third and final webinar, which I'm going to mention at the end, is going to focus on content performance and measurement. So back to today. If anybody doesn't know, I'm Rob. I run Fourth Wall Content, and I've been working with some of the team at Zengenti to help, to help with getting a strategic system in place for creating and measuring content. So we've developed a content inventory, a content plan with a regular publishing cadence. We've identified some product value themes. We've identified user needs and built a repeatable and measurable system for their content. And that content provides both helpful and practical advice to the audience, but also promotes the Consensus product as well. So we've also increased the frequency of the newsletter, and some of you here today may be subscribed to that. And we just thought, because I've helped with their content strategy, it would be good to continue the partnership with this series of webinars. And in terms of what your role may be, your organization, the sector that you work in, I think whether you're coming at this from a technical angle, whether it's from UX, content creation, management, the principles that we cover today should be relevant to your work. Okay, the kind of quick obligatory bio time. I'm a journalism graduate. I spent time as an audience researcher for the BBC, which is actually brilliant in understanding what people actually want versus what they think they want. And then after that, I headed up content for different design agencies and a SaaS company before founding Fourth Wall Content 4 years ago, and also the obligatory slide logo. Someone pointed out to me I work with a lot of people with three-letter kind of acronyms. But yeah, there's some of the organizations I've worked with there, helping them with their content strategy, content design, and content operations. So the sort of common thread, I suppose, in the work that I've done for these organizations and others is that organizations get to a point of having good content, and we talked about that last time, but they struggle to manage it strategically and systematically as they grow or as things change or as there's new priorities, etc. We saw a lot of that with COVID, the need to react to COVID in terms of their content and, are they open, are they closed, what are the kind of procedures they needed to follow, all that sort of stuff. The organizations with good foundations were able to react to that with confidence, and others were scrambling around and panicking. And so that's kind of what we're tackling today. And this is a bit more detail what we're going to cover. So we're going to start by kind of understanding what content systems actually are and why they matter. Then we're going to dive into information architecture, how you organize content so people can actually find and use it. And then we're going to look at content modeling and governance. And they're the frameworks that keep content consistent and keep it manageable. And then we'll talk about scalability and flexibility, because any system you build needs to grow with your organization. And then we're going to finish by addressing some challenges that you may face with some practical solutions. So in terms of understanding content systems, I think this is probably a fundamental question for today in terms of what exactly are content systems. So here's my definition. Content systems are structured approaches to creating, managing, storing, and delivering content across an organization. Let's break that down a little bit. So structured approaches means you're not just creating content randomly when someone remembers or when there is a crisis. You've actually got intentional processes and frameworks to help with the reactive content as well as the kind of proactive content. And then creating, managing, storing, and delivering, that's the full kind of content lifecycle. We touched on that last time as well. There may be, you may call those kind of stages different things where you are, or there may be additional ones, but ultimately it is about the full content lifecycle. And a lot of organizations are decent at creating content or work hard to get to the point where they're creating good content, but it is the managing, the storing, and the delivering at scale where things often fall apart. And then in terms of that last bit there, across an organization, I put that in because it's crucial, really. We're not talking about one department doing it on their own. We're talking about systems that work for everyone. So some of that covered, I suppose, why content systems matter. But I've got a lovely image there of a honeycomb, and it isn't random. It's organized and efficient, that honeycomb. Each cell has a purpose, everything fits together perfectly. The whole structure can expand systematically, and that's really what we're aiming for with content systems. So first, they bring order to content chaos. Instead of content scattered across different platforms, created by different people, different standards, different priorities, you'll get a coherent structure. Second, they reduce redundancy in the sense of, how many times have you seen maybe three different departments writing three different versions of essentially the same information? Content systems fix that kind of duplication, contradiction, wasted resource. Thirdly, they ensure consistency, which leads on from the second, really. Same voice, same standards, same quality across all your content touch points. And fourth, they enable efficient content creation. So instead of starting from scratch every time, you can actually repurpose content. You've got reusable components, templates, processes, and frameworks. And the stuff we discussed last time in content strategy kind of informs all of this and powers all of this as well. And then fifth, they support organizational growth and change. So as the business, the team expands or even shrinks, I suppose, it's still relevant there. Your content can scale or descale with it rather than becoming like increasingly chaotic. So I think it's slightly more relevant to organizations that are growing. And it's also true when there's just changes within the organization in terms of ownership of content and governance as well. It helps kind of keep consistency there rather than somebody leaving and taking all the information with them in their head. It helps kind of the organization have a collective ownership and management of content as well. So I guess without systems, content becomes or can become a liability rather than an asset, and it becomes harder to maintain. Therefore, it becomes more expensive to manage, and therefore it becomes less effective at actually serving the goals of your users and the business. In terms of the key components of content systems, then, I mentioned these at the start a little bit in the agenda. So there's information architecture, and that is the foundation, how you organize and structure content that determines everything else. Then there's content modeling, that's creating repeatable blueprints for different types of content. And then we've got taxonomy and metadata, which are the systems that make content findable, filterable, connectable, etc. Now, those three things in isolation are all really big topics that could probably have a series of webinars on themselves each. And we're only kind of going to skim them today, really. But I can't stress enough how they're so fundamental to be able to have a kind of measurable strategic system in place. And I guess, this might sound technical to some, depending on your kind of background and your role and your experience. But they affect everyone who creates or uses content. Poor information architecture means users can't find what they need. Poor content models mean inconsistent, hard to maintain content. Poor taxonomy means content that might as well be invisible. So the key insight here is that these components work together. And really to fix one, you kind of need to be thinking about all of them as much as you can. Okay, so let's dive into information architecture. Here's a definition there, and it's the art and science of organizing and structuring content. I said art and science there, which might sound a little bit jargony, but I suppose for me, art and science are kind of, the proven principles. And so I think it's good to try and frame information architecture in a way that isn't just like, oh, it's technical or it's not something I should consider, it's not relevant to me. And in the context of today's kind of topic and overarching theme, information architecture covers these four main areas. So it's how content is organized. And there we're really thinking about the logical groupings and categories that make sense to users and not just your internal structure. So not having, a navigation that's labeled by internal departments that the users don't understand. And then logical content structures, really, we're thinking about hierarchies that help people understand relationships between different pieces of content. So logical pathways and connected content that makes sense. And then user-friendly navigation, again, a kind of pathway that will help people accomplish their goals, achieve their tasks, and build that kind of trust and loyalty with your brand and your content. And in terms of findability principles, making sure people can locate information through browsing, searching, or following those logical connections. So not one or the other, but actually having those multiple ways for people to find content, depending on their context, their preference, their device even. Okay. So the principles that help to make this work and really kind of fundamental here. I guess the foundation of good IA, information architecture, is user-centered design, in the sense that it's really about starting with user needs rather than organizational structure or stakeholder priorities. That's not to say that they won't match the user needs, but often there can be a disconnect between what the business thinks it needs and what the users actually want. And sometimes there's that kind of sweet spot in the middle, and a bit of an overlap that content strategy can help to serve. So really, we need to understand those user needs. Like, what are people actually trying to accomplish? What questions are they asking? What tasks are they trying to complete? What are they feeling? Where are they getting their information from? How are they accessing it? What formats? All those kind of questions, many of which we covered in webinar 1. And so really, this requires research, not assumptions, and turning knowledge into understanding. Secondly, we want to create intuitive structures. So information should be organized in a way that makes sense to those users based on their mental models. And again, not your departmental structure, unless that is the mental model of your user. And we also want to be able to support those user journeys. So, people don't usually need just one piece of information. They might need sequences of information to accomplish a goal, and your architecture should support those journeys. So if you think of accessing a service, for example, there may be several stages that you need to go through, and kind of being able to present all of that to the users so they can get to the end and complete what they need. And of course, all of this kind of relies on testing with real users. Your logic might be perfect, but if users can't navigate it, find it, use it, then it's not going to work. So a sort of common mistake that I've seen is universities organizing information by academic department when prospective students are thinking about programs or career outcomes or campus life and things. Also, government websites organized by departmental structure when citizens are maybe thinking about life events. So they're thinking about having a baby, starting a business, retiring, and so trying to kind of match those up, match up the service with the user language expectations and vocabulary. So the solution, where possible, is to start with user research, design your architecture around how people actually think, and use that information. So logical organization is required for good IA, and I mean logical from the user perspective, as well as your own. So group related content together, and that may sound obvious, but you would maybe be surprised how often content gets scattered because it's owned by different departments. So I'm working with somebody now, and they've got a whole ream of content about one particular topic, and it isn't categorized at all together, and nor does it cross-link to each other. So it really is a completely disjointed kind of user experience that literally leaves users just kind of abandoning the kind of process. And part of that is creating a clear hierarchy. So understanding how information relates to other information, like what's broad, what's specific, what are the logical progressions. And then part of that, again, is developing a consistent navigation. So similar types of content should be findable in similar ways. If you're looking for kind of course information, if that works one way for biology, it should work the same way for history. We don't want users to have to relearn your content models and your IA and your pathways every single time that they're looking for a piece of content. And then trying to balance that breadth and that depth as well. Too many choices can overwhelm people. Too few choices mean that they may not actually get anywhere and get what they need. And so it's trying to kind of understand that, like how much do they need? How far should they go? How much is presented at any given time? How deep are we going to take them, and things like that. So I think that's that's kind of important to keep in mind, and thinking about how they'll be accessing it, and then trying to validate that as well. So I guess the key principle here is every piece of content should have a logical place, and users should be able to almost predict where to find things based on the overall structure. And when we think about content categorization, really meaning how you group and label content so it does make sense to users. So developing clear content types is really important here. A course is different from a news article, which is different from a service description. and each type should have their own consistent characteristics. We also want to be creating logical groupings that reflect how users think about your content as well, which kind of covered already, and then supporting multiple user pathways. So people approach the same information from different angles. So somebody might be thinking topic, someone might be thinking audience, type of content, urgency. And so it's not necessarily one way in, one way out. It's multiple ways. Not everybody's going to start at your homepage, for example. So, where will they arrive and where will they go to will heavily depend on how your content is categorized, structured, linked, etc. And so I think where possible, a part of that is like using consistent naming conventions. Again, so people aren't having to relearn all the time or guess. There's nothing worse than like fumbling around looking for something. So if you call something a program in one place, don't call it a course somewhere else. And I guess it's not just about making things tidy, it's about making things discoverable and importantly, usable. And poor categorization means that content, may not be found and therefore may as well not exist. And when we think about navigation design, so this is how people actually move into your content, intuitive menu structures should reflect user priorities and not your org chart. I see that so much, where it's based around the organizational chart, which users often don't care about. And clearly then using language that your users understand. So again, moving away from internal jargon and actually understanding what your users call something and refer to something as, and using that language so they know where they are, where to go, and they have confidence in the information that you're presenting to them. And then that consistency again is important to help people kind of predict where things are and find things. I've got this compass image there. Again, not just abstract, really, I hope. Navigation really is about helping people orient themselves and find their direction, no matter where they are in your content. Now, not everybody is going to come in at the same point and then go through like a linear journey. It's a lot more inconsistent in how people access it, I suppose. So they should be able to find where they are and where they need to go, regardless of where they are and where they need to go within your content. So I like to share some of the kind of observations I've seen, and one of the common mistakes I've seen around navigation is exactly that, assuming everyone enters from your homepage. So all the kind of focus is there, and then in reality, people will end at random points, and then they're just completely lost from the first kind of instance. With content modeling, this is a big topic, but really it's in the context of today, it's thinking about blueprints for different types of content. Before you build a house, you need a detailed plan showing how it all fits together, and a content model is doing the same for your content. So there, I guess, activities we could call them. Content modeling has 4 key activities. Firstly is creating that blueprint. So defining what elements each type of content needs and how they relate. Then we need to think about defining the content types and attributes. So what fields does a course description need versus a news article versus a service page? Then establishing those content relationships. How do different pieces of content connect to each other? And then supporting consistent creation. So giving content creators clear templates to work from. And there's different ways of doing that. It could be that it's more written guidelines. It could be that it's something built within your kind of technology in your CMS. Could be that you have, I've seen it where there's templates in Google Docs, for example. There's lots of ways that you can kind of support that need. But something is needed to help people create content, so that if you're getting 8 academics providing course information, if they've got a template, then if they've done it right. And of course, when there's people involved, we can't guarantee anything, but they should have a course title, the kind of how many points you'll get, what the kind of modules are, etc. So you can give them a template and a model that can also help with better migration into your system if it's not happening within the system at the point of creation. So with good models, you get consistency, efficiency, and the ability to reuse content across multiple channels. So in terms of identifying those content types to then build models for and from, common examples, this is not an exhaustive list, but examples of content types to give it some context: a blog post, a product description, a case study, a support article, your social media content, videos, multimedia. Obviously, the specific types that you need will depend on your organization and your users. So to stick with the higher ed theme, a university might have their course descriptions, faculty profiles, research summaries, student stories, etc. A government agency might have service descriptions, application forms, guidance documents, consultation papers, all different content types. So the key here is being systematic about this. Don't just assume that you know what types of content you have. Actually do an audit and then see if there's opportunity to group similar items together. And then taking it kind of a layer down there, once you've identified your content types, you need to define your attributes. So here we're thinking about the specific elements that each content type needs. And again, not an exhaustive list, but just some examples to give some context and try and put this into perspective, I suppose. It's the basic attributes that most content types share or many share will be a title, an author, a date, a keyword, related content, metadata, etc. Content blocks, but different content types need different specific attributes. So again, a course description will need credits, a schedule, instructor information, government service needs, eligibility criteria, application process, etc. I guess the goal here is to be comprehensive enough that you capture all the necessary information, but not so complex that the content creation just becomes a burden and stressful. You don't want so many kind of guidelines and limits and things that it just stresses people out. So a key insight here is that good attribution definition makes content more useful and reusable, usable and reusable, which is really important. Governance is a huge topic, so forgive me for going over it so quickly, but content governance is establishing the rules, the standards, and the processes for content management. So when we're thinking about content guidelines, writing standards, they cover grammar, style, terminology, formatting. This is not about stifling creativity, and it's not about kind of making someone feel like you're standing over their shoulder, pointing at every single word that they're writing. It's just about ensuring that kind of professional consistency, which is really important with decentralized teams, lots of content creators, remote and hybrid working, etc. Brand voice, those guidelines will help everyone understand how your organization should sound. So you're professional but approachable, etc. And the decisions there need to be explicit, not left to individual interpretation. It's really important to build that kind of consistent brand voice. And linked to that, heavily linked to voice, is your tone. So your voice tends to be consistent, but your tone can change depending on the context, the audience, and the channel. And that's really important to kind of capture. I'd say for all these guidelines, have examples of real content from your organization. So you're not just telling people, you're actually showing them, and the guidelines become, a real kind of pragmatic tool for them. So style requirements, this is where you get kind of prescriptive in a necessary way when we're thinking about how are headings, lists, links, and other things kind of formatted, and where does it need to be consistent. And then your visual content standards, what are your standards for your images, your videos, other multimedia elements that you may have. Workflow processes define how content moves from one stage to another with all the stages in between. Again, the full content life cycle. So let's say from initial idea through to publication and then measurement and management. So one of the things I like to do when I go into an organization is ask them, how do you get a piece of content done? Any piece of content, an article, a case study, a report, a web, one of your web pages, for example. And it's amazing the insights you can get about the people, the processes, and the tools, therefore the content operations in the organization, just by getting someone to talk through that process. So you're not even asking them who's involved and what stage and what's their role and what do they do and what technology are they using at that stage. Asking them nothing other than talk me through it. And you get so much insight into their operations and where there's gaps and overlaps and bottlenecks and unnecessary tools and missing tools and all those kind of things. And if you can go into that yourselves, today, think about or ask somebody how they get content done, and it's really insightful. So, who's involved, what happens when, what approvals are needed, making sure there's no bottlenecks because you've got defined processes rather than just organic processes that aren't fit for purpose. And often people prefer the path of least resistance, even if they know it's not the most efficient way of doing things. So having these conversations can kind of be the start of refining and iterating processes. And then thinking about publication procedures that might minimize errors and maintain consistency, maintenance schedules for keeping your content current and accurate. Does something need to be updated periodically? Does something need to be archived, etc.? And just making sure basically that all your content is relevant, has a purpose, and it's needed. It's absolutely needed because otherwise you're leading people. If we think about the kind of logical pathways we talked about earlier, leading people to content that isn't accurate, isn't needed, and therefore you're leading them to a dead end, which is frustrating. So, I see a lot of organizations, all sizes, all sectors, with really informal, inconsistent processes. And that might have worked at one point, maybe when the organization was smaller. But as they grow, those processes break down. And really a good workflow will scale with the organization as things kind of grow and change. So I think you probably have to find the right balance between quality control and efficiency. You don't want to have too many approval stages that are just creating bottlenecks and frustration. But then if you have too few, then there might be inconsistency and errors. So it is, I guess it's kind of putting the processes into practice and seeing if they're fit for purpose and what you can learn from them, and then iterating as you may need. And then within those processes, then you'll have your roles and responsibilities. And these are essential for good governance. So you'll need content creators who can actually, write and develop content that's on brand and meets user needs and business goals and all those things. Then you might need editors who can review for quality, consistency, accuracy, etc. Approvers who have the authority to publish content. And that's really important, having somebody who owns that stage of the workflow, or it might be multiple people, but hopefully not anybody and everybody. And then publishers who handle the technical aspects of getting content live. And I appreciate that there can be overlap in these roles depending on the sort of size and structure of your organization. And then if you do have a content strategist, then they can oversee that overall system and process as well, which is a bit of a luxury for many organizations, but it's great if you have it. So I guess in this sense, the most common problem I see is unclear ownership. So everybody's responsible for content, or nobody's responsible, and both are problematic for different reasons. So when it comes to scalability, I've mentioned a few times that the problems happen when organizations grow. And so we really want to be having conscious kind of conversations and decision making about all the things we've discussed so far today to support that organizational growth. It may be the growth doesn't happen that often, and you may not be adding new departments and services and locations all the time. But it's good to be prepared for that, or any level of change or growth. So your content system needs to kind of accommodate those changes and that growth. And then adapting to changing needs, your users' expectations might evolve, technology might be changing, your organizational priorities might shift. So being able to adapt to those needs with confidence that what you're doing is actually meeting those needs. And again, that COVID example is a good one as well, in terms of like that panic to respond to something unexpected. Just having confidence that the content you're creating is accurate and meaningful and useful and usable and accessible and findable and inclusive and all those things that content needs to be, which is why it can be hard. And then sort of maintaining that content quality as that volume of publishing increases. You don't want it to be the more that you create, the worse it gets, and the kind of lower the quality. So this is why a system and guidelines and standards and frameworks can support that quality through growth as well. And so I guess you're just trying to enable content expansion, whether that's into new channels or new formats, again, with confidence. So that's why scalability matters there. And then when we think about the modular content approach, really here we're thinking about creating reusable components that can be combined in different ways. So you might want content in reusable components that works across multiple contexts. You want to be supporting multiple channels, so the same content can work perhaps on your website as it would in social media or even in print as well. And therefore, we're reducing redundant creation by writing once and using everywhere where it's relevant. And so there's this, I guess, this mix and match approach to content where you can combine those components to create new resources. And we're just trying to reduce the burden of content creation and management, and also make content an asset that we can get the most from in multiple kind of contexts. But we need to be flexible as well for long-term success. We don't want to be too rigid where this kind of breaks down at the first kind of challenge and hurdle and things. So to be flexible, we really need to design adaptable templates that can accommodate different content types and those evolving needs. We need to be able to support multiple content types with the same framework and enable easy updates without complete restructuring. So again, it's about iteration and refinement and that flexibility. So it's never starting from scratch. It's always, adapting and kind of evolving as you kind of go. So I suppose the key thing here is future-proofing your content and your operations that support your content, so you can adapt as needed, whether that's to a new technology, to a new channel, a new audience, launching a new service. So the goal is to build systems that are structured enough for that kind of consistency and confidence and support, but flexible enough to change as you need them to. And of course, technology is going to be a big part of this. It needs to support your content strategy and not dictate your content strategy. And so the choices you make can have long-term implications. I've seen it over and over again where people spend, a huge amount of money on a new CMS thinking that's going to like fix their problems, and it doesn't because they haven't solved the people side of it and the process side of it and the kind of guideline side of it and things. But the technology is like a huge part of this. So, you want a flexible content management system. You don't want to be constraining people too much. And really a headless CMS option is ideal for many people because that separates content management from the presentation, which can, for those organizations, give more flexibility in how content is displayed. And content infrastructure planning should consider current needs of the organization and the user, but also, where possible, anticipate further growth. Now, I know that can be hard, but you don't want to invest in your kind of technology and then very soon after it's not fit for purpose. So that whole kind of procurement and tender process is fundamental to long-term success and future-proofing of your content management. So as we're getting to the end now, just thinking about some kind of challenges, and then we'll do a wrap up and some next steps. I've probably said the word consistency more in the last 30 minutes than is necessary, maybe, but it is a really important part of this kind of topic. And so, yeah, let's kind of tackle some of these challenges head on, I suppose. So really, we want to maintain uniform quality when you've got multiple contributors across different departments and they've got varying skills and priorities. Again, we don't want to sort of be too prescriptive where people feel stunted and, it may be that you need to have different voices and tones and things, but having consistency where relevant, whether that's in structure, in language, in presentation, etc. Part of that is going to be managing those multiple contributors. And so to manage them effectively, you need those clear guidelines. You might need might need some training programs, etc. And of course, retraining and updating guidelines as things do change as well. So any guideline should never just be like sent and left in an inbox or a desk drawer and things. Should be a helpful living, breathing document. And then a key part of this is going to be keeping content aligned with strategy. And that means having regular communication and feedback loops. So, you may set your content strategy, but it doesn't mean that's going to be it for like 6 months, 12 months and beyond. Your strategy may change as well. And so, you need to make sure that your content is aligned with that strategy, whether that's archiving content, whether it's revealed a gap in your content, etc. And again, enforcing the standards, but without stifling creativity and causing frustration. Trying to make people almost enjoy, I guess, creating content and not feeling like it's a burden. Challenge 2 is complexity, in the sense of as your content system grows, it can become a bit unwieldy. It can become a bit sort of, I guess, hard to manage or harder to manage the bigger it gets. So Managing large content volumes, that's going to require the good taxonomy that we mentioned. It's going to require maybe search functionality. So again, the content and the technical side are very heavily linked. And the sort of symptom of that is going to be the quality of the user experience. So we also need to be supporting multiple channels. So that means thinking about content structure as early as possible, from the beginning ideally, but a lot of people are not starting from scratch these days. They have something already. So thinking about content structure as soon as possible. And then keeping systems simple so that simple as they can be. So even as they grow, you can kind of review them regularly and decide if there's opportunity to simplify anything within the system. And so we need to balance flexibility and structure, being intentional about which elements are fixed and being intentional about which elements can vary and are more flexible. So I guess to overcome those challenges, we've covered a bit of this, but it's a kind of good summary as well. Develop clear guidelines that help those content creators, do better work and hopefully work that they enjoy. Invest in training because, good systems are only as effective as the people that are using those systems. So that's a really important one. And then use your technology wisely to support your processes. You don't want to complicate them by having all this kind of technology that isn't needed or isn't fit for purpose. The technology really should make people's lives easier and should support those processes. And then continuously review and improve the systems based on real world experience, based on what your users are telling you, based on what your team and your employees are telling you and your colleagues and things. And where possible, I always recommend starting small and then expanding systematically rather than trying to solve everything at once. So we have covered a lot, so I'm trying to sort of summarize it as best I can. I think for me, maybe the four key takeaways are content systems bring structure and efficiency. So they turn content from a recurring expense into a strategic asset. And then second, information architecture supports user understanding. So good organization makes content actually useful and not just available. And then third, governance ensures content quality. So clear processes and standards prevent chaos, again, without stifling that creativity and without making it harder for people to get the content done in the first place. And fourth, scalability enables organizational growth. So systems that grow with you are an investment, and will actually pay off long term. So I guess these are not just theoretical concepts, they're kind of practical approaches that make content more effective and long term less expensive to manage. And I think the organizations that get this right, they see measurable improvements in both kind of their user satisfaction, but also in their operational efficiency and therefore in their business outcomes. And then to wrap up then some kind of next steps, because I appreciate it's been a lot of information. So if you're thinking, right, what can I do after this webinar, then my recommendations would be one or some of the following list. Audit your current content organization. So before you can even improve your structure, you really need to understand what the current structure is. You might want to pick one content type or one user journey and then kind of map that thoroughly and see how that kind of is structured and organized. You might want to document one key content type model. So maybe don't try to model everything at once, but choose, could be your most important or problematic content, and then create a proper content model for that. You might want to create basic governance guidelines. You could start simple with kind of practical rules that address the biggest consistency problem or inconsistency problem rather, and then identify scalability bottlenecks. Quite jargony that sentence, sorry, but like where do your current processes break down as maybe your team is growing or the content volume is growing, etc. So pick one of these, commit to maybe making progress on that in the next month, and then kind of turn it into action. I suppose it improves the way that you're managing content and kind of governing and growing in your organization. So I guess the goal isn't perfection. I think that's really important. It can be a bit overwhelming to think, right, I need to do all these things. And even if you're starting small, it can feel like, right, I'm never going to get to the end of it. So the goal isn't perfection, it's just progress. Small improvements in content structure and governance will compound over time and deliver bigger benefits. So two quick references. The Zengenti conference Velocity is happening on the 4th of November in London. I will be there talking about content in AI rather. I always get the wrong way around. I might mention IA, who knows, but definitely going to be talking about AI. So if you're there, come and say hi. It'd be great to meet you. And also the next webinar, I mentioned that this is webinar 2 of 3. The third one is happening 2 weeks today on the 16th of October. 12 p.m. UK time again, and it's about content performance and measurement. Thank you very much.